From sleep paralysis demons to shadowy figures lurking in the night, get your Ouija boards out because we are contacting the other side. Here is part 3 of the top 10 evil people who summoned real demons. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the dreams. This is a story from somebody named Jake P, and they wrote, quote, "My buddy and I found a Ouija board at my girlfriend's house. We were really bored, so we went to this graveyard by my house to see if it would actually work. As suspected, nothing happened. We brought the board back to my house and didn't think anything of it. I feel like that's like the classic story. Just when the Ouija board hears you talking smack, that's when things always start to go crazy though." Jake continues on saying, quote, "The next day, strange things began happening. Out of nowhere, my friend started having sleep paralysis every time he spent the night at my house, despite never having it before. The first time he saw a tall woman with long black hair standing in the corner of the room facing the wall. The next time he was asleep on the couch and he saw the same woman standing at my open door looking directly into my room." I don't know what demon lady they summoned, but I hope they did everything they could to get rid of her. Sounds an awful lot like the bent neck lady, and we all know how well that went. In our number 9 spot today, we have Joe. Joe isn't necessarily the first name that comes to my mind when making a list of spooky demons, but this story that was posted on Reddit might just make me think a little differently. They explained that a few months ago, one of their friends brought over a Ouija board. There were around 5 of them at this sleepover, and they all began playing around with it and asking questions, and that is when they met Joe. After about an hour of questions and answers with Joe, one of the girls asks, "Joe, are you a bad spirit?" Joe answered, "N-O, okay. That's good." But then Joe spelled out H-I-M. The girls asked him who he was talking about, and that's when he spelled out the words "he's coming" and started to spell out Zozo, which, if you aren't familiar, is one of the worst Ouija board demons you could possibly encounter. That ended up being the end of the Ouija board experience for the girls that night because how terrifying, but they decided in the morning to try again. This time, they began speaking to someone who apparently claimed to be Joe's wife. They asked her if Joe was a bad spirit, to which she quickly replied, "Y-E-S." In our number 8 spot today, we have the dog. This story starts off with the storyteller, who we'll call Alicia, and her friends playing with a Ouija board in the backyard. She explains that they did end up contacting someone, and this is when one of the friends, who was also there, decides that it would be a good idea to insult the name of this entity. I don't know about you, but I certainly would never risk it. I'm not trying to be haunted for the rest of my life and my afterlife just because I thought I was smug. Anyway, when the friend throws this insult out, the fence behind them immediately starts to rattle. This was enough to convince them that it was time to pack up and head back inside. They all headed for the door, but Alicia's dog stopped at the bottom of the stairs, which was already unusual behavior. When they turned to look at the dog, they found him standing there just snarling, looking at something that he could see out in the darkness. I'm sure hoping that the person learned not to insult people who lay on the other side. In our number 7 spot today, we have Blanche. This story comes from the Reddit user Turtleshell Magic, and it involves their friends M and L. So one night, the 3 of them were at M's house and decided to crack open the good old Ouija board for a little spooky fun. They contacted some sort of spirit whose name was Blanche and who lived sometime in the 1800s, and everything was going well until M asked Blanche how they died, and she replied with the word killing. M asked how they had been killed, and Blanche said, "Not I." From there, everything started to get really heavy and the room just felt different. All of a sudden, the board was ripped from their hands and went flying across the room. They stopped playing immediately, but I don't think that they closed everything properly. After this incident, M's mom passed away just a week after from an illness that no one knew she had. Not long after this, L's mom was hospitalized, and then shortly after that, Turtleshell's mom had to have emergency surgery. Maybe this was all just some horrible coincidence, but Turtleshell says that since then they have experienced things that they think are directly related to what happened that night. Things like hearing voices, dark shadows, hearing footsteps. They find themselves wondering if they're still haunted despite it having been 9 years since that night. In our number 6 spot today, we have the devil. This is a story that is actually the one that caused this person to swear off Ouija boards for the rest of their life. They say the experience was so terrifying it made them completely lose interest. They explain that halfway through their session in this particular circumstance, they ended up contacting a new spirit who claimed to be the devil. I personally would like to hang up that call for sure, especially when this person explains that the spirit seemed to be annoyed that it was being disturbed. Like, so sorry, no problem, I'll go. The storyteller explains that after receiving several messages from the spirit that said, please stop, and then stop, which for the record I would have listened the first time, but apparently they just kept going because they say that suddenly the temperature dropped, just like you see in the movies. From here, the spirit gave them a message that read, if you do not stop now, I will fill the room with the most evil spirits. They definitely took that one seriously and decided it was best to stop, and simply has never gone back. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Thrifting Find. One day this Reddit user found a real old school wooden Ouija board at a thrift store. I probably would have run in the opposite direction, but they ended up purchasing it. Later that evening, they and a friend decided to try it out and asked a few questions but never got a response. They of course got bored and left the Ouija board out on the bed and headed out of the house to go and get some snacks. This was all fine until they came back to the house. When they got back, they realized that the planchette was now moving, but completely on its own. The word foul was being spelled out over and over again, and the two just stared at it in absolute awe. Eventually they grabbed the board, broke it in half, and covered it with salt before they got rid of it in a safe place. I definitely think that experience was probably the last time they ever used a Ouija board. In our number 4 spot today, we have persistence. This story is from someone with the username Amara Lachey, and they wrote, quote, my cousin was heading to a party with a Ouija board in the trunk of her car for all of us to use. On the way to the party, she got in a car wreck. She was fine, but her car was totaled. So obviously, instead of going to the party, she went back home. When she opened her closet to get ready for bed, the board was somehow back in the closet. She burned it after that. Honestly, that is the only truly good response to having something like that happen. I'm just glad she was okay, and hopefully that board never came back again. In our number 3 spot today, we have signs. This story starts out like many of the others on this list. A group of friends just casually trying their hand at contacting the paranormal. You know, that stuff that most of us do on weekends. The friends felt as though they had contacted someone, but they wanted to be sure, so they said, if you're here, give us a sign. They all stood there and nothing happened, which made them doubt the power and ability of the Ouija board. Just as they were beginning to laugh at the board, they received a sign that the entity was with them. This came in the form of lights flickering on and off for minutes at a time. It didn't stop here though. They also could hear footsteps stomping above them despite being the only ones home. Safe to say they were sufficiently spooked and apologized for ever doubting whatever entity they came into contact with. In our number 2 spot today, we have the following. This story starts out when this person's mother began to get interested in things like card reading and the occult, and she began trying to speak to spirits. One day she was using a Ouija board, and when the storyteller touched the planchette, it is said that it flew right out of his hand and smashed against the wall. This happened when he was a teenager, but since then, nothing has been the same. They explained that from then on, in the night, they could feel something looking at them from the darkest corner of their room, like some sort of shadowy figure. You can't really see because it's dark and it's nighttime, but you know it's there. Throughout their life, even after moving to different homes, they have seen things in the places they live that seem to be following them anywhere they go. In our number 1 spot today, we have I See You. This story comes from a Reddit user called No Springs. One day they were at a friend's house having fun and goofing around, and they decided to bring out a Ouija board. They weren't getting very many results and weren't really taking it seriously, but then they got a message from the board saying, I can see you through the window. And then another after that said, I can see you through his eyes. There was a small window in the basement room they were in, and through that window they could see the backyard, the driveway, and the woods that lay behind it. They continued to ask the spirit questions and ended up getting an answer that said, I'm under the car. Somehow they were able to muster up the nerve to go and check under the car with flashlights. When they looked, they found a huge black stray cat hissing. This obviously terrified them, and they all ran back into the house as quickly as possible. At the exact moment they get back inside the house, all of the power shuts off, the lights go out, and it's completely dark. After that, it's safe to say that they stayed up all night, unable to sleep, and they definitely never played with a Ouija board again. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you next time. Bye!